It's the cops versus the mayor in the Big Apple. Two of New York's finest were murdered by one of New York's worst, a 28-year-old felon who had 19 arrests on his record, shot two of the policemen at point-blank range while they were sitting in their squad car as a cowardly retaliation for police brutality.
And now some are wondering if the protests sparked by Ferguson have encouraged violence against police. And so police around the nation are on high alert. They're telling officers to wear bulletproof vests and to watch what they say. Caitlin Burke has that story.
Authorities want to know if the man who killed two New York City police officers took part in the protests over the deaths of Michael Brown or Eric Gardner. Just days before Christmas, the deadly attack sending shockwaves around the country.
Shots fired, shots fired.
Officers Rafael Ramos and Wenjen Liu were ambushed in Brooklyn on Saturday, shot to death in their patrol car. Authorities identified the gunman as 28-year-old Ismael Brinsley. Earlier in the day, police say he'd posted on Instagram, quote, "I'm putting wings on pigs today. They take one of ours, let's take two of theirs." That reference about Michael Brown and Eric Gardner, both killed in police-related incidents. Civil rights leaders have come forward to condemn the attacks of the police officers, but politicians and police union officials say that those who have protested the deaths of Gardner and Brown have fanned anti-police rhetoric. The president of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association in New York, Patrick Lynch, said there was blood on the hands of demonstrators. Officer Ramos had two children, and Officer Liu was a newlywed. Police say their killer, Ismael Brinsley, later shot and killed himself.
Make this world a better place if you can.
A candlelight vigil held for the two officers, finally uniting New Yorkers.
We need to show solidarity, and hopefully this will bring us together, not further apart.
The family of Officer Ramos is appealing for peace. One family member saying they've already forgiven the gunman. In the wake of the attack on the two officers, police departments are warning their officers to change up their routines, insist on extra backup, and to be careful what they post on social media. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, you know, the officers turned their back on the Mayor de Blasio, and they actually have asked, please don't show up at any of our funerals. This thing was brought on. The president is implicated in it, the mayor and others who have downplayed the police. Who was invited to the White House? Al Sharpton, complaining about police brutality and so forth. And there's been a culture of dumping on the police. They're there to serve. And yes, there can be some bad policemen, but we don't go around shooting police. They're there to defend the neighborhood. And if they decide they want to go on strike, and well, they might, New York is going to be in a heap of trouble. Well, there's another attack that perhaps is more pressing and more dangerous to America. President Obama is trying to downplay that cyber attack that took place on Sony. But North Korea is playing it up, vowing to strike back at the White House, the Pentagon, and the whole U.S. mainland. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN newsroom. Here's John.
Pat, North Korea is promising to retaliate against the U.S. for blaming them for the hacking. President Obama is measuring how to respond to what he calls an act of cyber vandalism against Sony Pictures. The possible punishment includes putting the country back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. It's a move former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff weighed in on this weekend.
Cannot let this go unanswered. We ought to at least consider some kind of covert action that would make them pay a price.
And when the president calls this an act of vandalism, that just really bothers me greatly. It is an act of terrorism, and I hope he will respond forcefully because the Iranians are watching everything this man does.
The president said he does not think the cyber attack was an act of war. Well, a security flaw in cell phones could let anyone eavesdrop on your calls or text messages. A German security research lab discovered the flaws in a system used by cell phone carriers around the world. It reportedly opens the door to wide-ranging surveillance by any skilled person who could easily listen in on the phone calls or see the text messages and data traffic of billions of people. It also noted that users can protect themselves independently by using applications that encrypt their calls, messages, and emails. Teenage drug abuse, it's a big concern for health professionals and educators, but especially their parents. While a new study reveals some encouraging trends, Lori Johnson reports it's not all good news.
The number of high schoolers who abuse prescription painkillers is way down, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which has been tracking teen drug behavior for the last 40 years. They also report far fewer teens are now using illicit drugs like heroin and cocaine than in years past.
Probably that relates to very aggressive campaigns for prevention.
Binge drinking and traditional cigarette smoking are also on the decline.
On the other hand, teenagers using e-cigarettes has become very popular. Nearly 1 in 5 high school seniors engage in what's known as vaping.
E-cigarettes are highly addictive and may not be as safe as people think.
The problem, of course, has to do with the fact that if those e-cigarettes are improperly manufactured, then they can deliver toxins from leakage of paint or other materials that are used in their production.
Marijuana, now legal in some states, continues to be a teen favorite. 40% of high school seniors reportedly use it.
Unfortunately for marijuana, we are not seeing decreases in the rate of use. However, we're not seeing increases, which is good news.
A final area of concern is teens using prescription stimulants, like the ADHD drug Adderall, to get high or study for tests.
The problem of using stimulant medication to study for tests is that stimulant drugs are addictive, and actually they can be highly addictive. Number two, the use of stimulants can produce psychosis. They can also trigger seizure. They also have cardiovascular negative effects.
So while teenage drug abuse in America is still among the highest in the world, it appears to be holding steady or trending downward in several key areas. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Had a bit of a mixed bag, according to that report.
Well, you know, John and Terry, when I was growing up in high school, we didn't figure it was a right to get high. I mean, it wasn't even discussed. We weren't using drugs. We were appalled that somebody would take drugs. I remember when I was in college, just starting at Washington Lee, they had booked a band, a man named Gene Krupa. He was a well-known drummer, and he had a band. And he'd been busted for possession of marijuana, and they canceled him. I mean, everybody was shocked. We got this guy, you know, he's a drug addict. We don't want him. But we didn't, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of drinking, but in high school, there wasn't much of that. And maybe we'd sneak around and smoke a few cigarettes. But the idea of getting high, of having it as a right, that you had to have some substance, you didn't have that, did you?
Well, I think it came in for my generation right after we all got out of high school. It was kind of, I mean, I'm not laying this at their feet, but when the Beatles came to America, it seemed like drugs from a lot of what was going on in Europe came with them.
Well, it was probably part of Vietnam, too, because the soldiers over there, and I mean, the servicemen and women were given exposure to some pretty cheap heroin and other types of drugs, and they were so discouraged. That war was such a mess over there, and they just, you know.
We went through a lot of cultural struggle that began at that time, I think, and the war was a big part of that.
We've got doctors. Everything is an anxiety, and so doctors were prescribing Prozac and Valium and these things by the billions, not just a few million pills, billions of pills. Everybody, write a prescription, here, stay stoned, here, stay stoned. Oh, you're upset, your husband's been mean to you, stay stoned. And, I mean, you know, billions of those things were going out. So we got a culture that you had to have some narcotic to ease the pain of life.
Well, and no, I've always marveled at the fact that there's no fear of the repercussions of using some of these things that don't have, you know, I mean, kids have been using household cleaning chemicals and things.
Well,
I mean,
they're sniffing and snorting, and they
not
got
knowing the long-term impact.
Oh, glue particularly was driving, I mean, making people mentally unstable. It's a terrible thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we would have a culture, but as I say, we didn't have that need. And suddenly we have now, we've got to be medicated. Everybody's got to be high. We've got to have medication. Sure, you got to smoke a little grass. Oh, yeah, you're going to shoot a little coke. Oh, absolutely, you got to have a little of this. I mean, snort a little coke, whatever. And now, you know, heroin has become the drug of choice. It used to be in the black community, a lot of people taking it. It's reached up now into the white middle class and above. And
above.
And above. I mean, you know, but the higher levels up, because apparently heroin doesn't have quite as many immediate side effects as some of the other ones. I don't know. I've never used the stuff and don't intend to, but the thing of it is, we've got to do something as a culture. We just can't have a matter of right that you have to be medicated. We can't do that. Whew. Okay, well, let's go over to Europe where we can criticize them. John.
Pat, France is on heightened alert after a weekend of violent attacks. 13 people were injured when a man drove his car into crowds in the city of Dijon Sunday. Police arrested the man and described him as having psychological problems. Witnesses heard the driver say Allah is great, but French officials say terrorism was not his motive. Still, the attack came during renewed calls by Islamic extremists to attack France because of its involvement with the airstrikes in Iraq. And it came one day after a man assaulted and seriously injured 2 police officers with a knife in central France. Anti-terrorism police are trying to determine his motive. Well, many Iraqi Christians say they're finding little to celebrate this Christmas. Chased from their homes by Islamic State terrorists, many are still struggling. But CBN is on the scene to bring them comfort and encouragement. Gary Lane brings us a story from Kurdistan.
Despite recent military gains against the Islamic State, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi Christians, ethnic Yazidis, and others are still residing in temporary shelters. They fled ISIS atrocities last summer. Many are now receiving food and clothing, but their needs are changing as winter sets in.
This last summer, when we were here in August and September, we were really looking at providing water. Mostly importantly was to keep people hydrated because it was hot, days of 120 degrees. The real big challenge is for having physical comfort. Our goal here is to provide ample winterization products.
So what better time than Christmas to come bearing gifts?
We are so happy to be here with you. We are Christians from the United States, and we have just come to show you God's love.
Not only are Iraqi Christians and Yazidis in desperate need of help this Christmas, but also Syrians, refugees from the city of Kobani. The women say their husbands are away in that city, fighting a life and death struggle against ISIS. These women recently arrived in Erbil with their children. This 24-year-old says her husband stayed behind in Kobani to fight the Islamic terrorists.
Please pray for him so as to come and join his family.
And to keep them warm, the Kobani families received carpets to cover cold and drafty floors. Their children were given gloves to warm their hands, heavy woolen blankets, and pillows. Each family was given a gas tank and heater, along with a portable cooking stove.
Thank you so very, very much. No one has done anything for us. You are the first.
Some displaced Iraqis told us they needed powdered milk and diapers for their children. So CBN provided those necessities in partnership with the Barzani Charitable Trust Foundation.
Just because the fighting is not presently close to this area doesn't mean that people aren't fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their lives for warmth, they're fighting for their lives with sustenance, they're fighting for their lives with medical needs on a daily basis. CBN is here for the long haul.
CBN is not just here to take care of the physical needs of these people, although that's very important. We're here to take care of the spiritual needs.
The Yazidis warmly welcomed CBN Disaster Relief Director Ron Oates.
They were willing to listen to us, our personal witnessing and our personal testimony, and we felt that they were open to listening to the gospel.
God loves you and wants a good future for you.
We want to foretell the Word of God and demonstrate in tangible ways how God can meet the needs of people.
CBN is meeting the material needs of thousands of beleaguered Iraqis and Syrians. But it's also bringing them the greatest gift this Christmas, the reason for the season. Word of a baby born in a manger, a loving Messiah who offers them eternal hope and life. Gary Lane, CBN News, Iraqi Kurdistan.
Pat, that's a Christmas message for us all, especially for those needing encouragement in Syria and Iraq.
I appreciate it. We love the Kurds, and I think that they've gotten a raw deal out of all this, but somehow or other they're going to come together, and I just do hope the great powers sooner or later will recognize that they need an independent Kurdistan, but that may be down the road. But at this point of time, they need blankets, they need food, they need heaters, they need, diapers, they need all the stuff that we take for granted. And thank goodness that Ron Oates and his assistants there at CBN are offering this to them, and they are blessed. So, folks, if you want to help somebody at Christmas, you just say CBN Disaster Relief, and you can log on to our internet at cbn.com, or you can pick up the phone and call in. And even now, we're not going to just do it for Christmas. It goes on and on and on. We're going to help people who hurt. And thank God that we can be there for a few of them. Listen, when it's all said and done, what's Jesus say? I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. And inasmuch as you did it unto the least of these, my brethren, you did it unto me. So this is service to Jesus Christ at his birthday or all year long, because we love him.
Welcome back to Washington for this CBN News break. Republicans are fuming over the release of 4 terror suspects from Guantanamo Bay. The Defense Department sent the 4 Afghan prisoners back to Afghanistan Saturday. A review board called them a low security risk. But Fox News reports the top American commander in Afghanistan had concerns that the men could pose a threat to U.S. troops there. Congressional Republicans pledged there will be a fight in 2015, saying the president is exceeding his authority and creating a constitutional crisis. The administration plans to release more detainees in the coming weeks. Well, CBN is reaching children with special needs in Ukraine, providing a Superbook event where children watched a Superbook episode and enjoyed a performance by students from local schools. The children also got to meet Gizmo. Parents thank CBN staff for remembering their children this Christmas season and for bringing happiness to their lives through Superbook. The Superbook Series 1 aired on Mali Atgo TV earlier this year. Well, you can find out more about what CBN is doing around the world by logging on to cbn.com/internet.